Listen closely, 'cause if you breathe too loudly, you might miss the flutter of unseen wings in the darkest corridors of the world's holiest. Sanctuary for 14 centuries, the granite cube at the heart of Makkah has drawn hearts like a celestial magnet, yet very few pilgrims. Or otherwise suspect that a watcher of fire has paced its shadow since before the first crusader unsheathed a sword, before even the last idol fell at the hand of the prophet. He is called many names in whispers, but none dare speak them aloud. To do so is to invite the shiver of a presence so ancient that the night itself seems young beside him. He was forged from smokeless flame, chosen on a night when the stars quivered over the Hijaz, and his vow is etched into eternity. No blade, no spell, no empire will ever touch the house while he stands guard. Centuries ago, when the Kaaba lay surrounded by cold stone idols and the tribes of Quraysh bartered souls for carvings of wood, the guardian felt the first tremor of danger. Abraha's war elephants thundered toward Makkah, ironclad soldiers chanting hymns of conquest. Yet as the dust rose, the great beast at the vanguard froze, eyes rolling, sensing a wall of power no mortal could see. Above, clouds burst into swarms of birds, tiny, fragile, impossible messengers, each clutching a pebble tipped with destiny. The world remembers the stones, forgets the invisible hands that guided them. With movements too swift for human sight, the guardian Jinn and his legion bent the trajectory of every rock, carving ruin into the invaders' ranks until silence swallowed their ambition. At sundown, the desert was littered with abandoned spears, and the Kaaba stood untouched, its protector shimmering like heat in the air, already turning to the next century's threat. Muhammad was born, and with that birth, the veil between worlds thinned. On nights when revelation descended, the guardian felt the Quran vibrate through dimensions, and his flame brightened with each verse of Tahdi. When the early believers crept into the sanctuary, hearts rattling under persecution, unseen hands curved stones off course, muffled arrows, tilted blades. A Quraysh archer once swore, his arrow screamed as if gripped mid-flight, turning harmlessly into the sand. He fled, never again daring to notch a bow in sight of the sacred house. Generations passed, empires erupted and turned to dust, and still the Jinn patrolled. During the Abbasid zenith, a cabal of foreign sorcerers traveled as pilgrims, their saddlebags stuffed with talismans steeped in blasphemy. In a moonless corner of the courtyard they began their incantation, and the temperature plummeted. Their tongues locked, parchment blackened, and every spell writhed to ash. What the human night guard saw was 5 men staggering away, raving about light and forgiveness. What truly happened was judgment pronounced by a voice forged in primordial fire. You tried to stain what the heavens polish. The sorcerers lived, but each dawned a believer, spending their years warning others of a guardian whose mercy was as searing as his wrath. Halfway through this tale, dear listener, the sands of history remind us that the unseen stands, even now, inches from your own heartbeat. If stories like these stir the embers of faith, simply ignite your curiosity, whisper a silent pledge, and press that subscribe button. It costs nothing, and yet it anchors you to every unfolding chapter of the hidden realm we explore together. When the drums of the Mongol horde thundered across Persia, scholars swore even the angels trembled. Cities crumbled as if made of parchment, libraries drowned in flame, and minarets snapped like dry reeds. But as the invaders neared the Hijaz, their war horses refused to cross unseen lines in the sand. Leaders who had never bowed to any god awoke night after night to nightmares of a blaze-wrought sentinel whose eyes were mirrors of their own doom. Without understanding why, they veered north, their maps curving away from Makkah like iron from a magnet. No chronicler recorded the guardian's name. No historian could. Yet he watched from dunes silvered by starlight, knowing that the greatest threat to the house of Allah was still to come, one not of steel or siege engines, but born of within the very sanctuary itself. And so we arrive at the winter of 1979 when, beneath fluorescent lights and chandeliers of the newly expanded mosque, rifles clicked where rosaries once rattled. Extremists sealed the gates, blood stained the marble, and for the first time in 14 centuries, human malice roosted inside the courtyard. What could a single Jinn, however devoted, do when the danger was not approaching from the desert? but already breathing the sanctified air. The answer, dear listener, lies beyond the limits of reason, waiting in the hush before the next heartbeat. For in that hush, a ripple passed through realms like a cry across galaxies. And every righteous Jinn from Samarkand to Senegal turned toward Makkah, as though summoned by a trumpet unheard by mortal ears. The guardian, his flame flickering beneath the acrid smoke of gunfire, stitched a lattice of light through the very atoms of the courtyard. Bullets that should have screamed across marble stalled mid-flight, wobbling like bees trapped in syrup, before dropping harmlessly at the feet of frightened worshippers. Grenades fizzled into puffs of inert dust. One rebel, eyes wild, swore he felt an invisible hand clamp around his wrist each time he tried to pull the pin. Outside, Saudi commanders wrestled with impossible blueprints, tunneling plans, the weight of global eyes. Yet in their briefest moments of despair they experienced flashes, turn left. Breach here, wait 3 breaths longer. Tactical whispers that arrived as if thoughts transplanted from a mind not their own. Those instructions were the Guardian's final gambit. Guidance poured into human hearts the way dawn pours into the valley. When the last shot rang out, and the insurgents were dragged from darkness into custody, not a single crack marred the ancient granite of the Kaaba. Silence fell, but it was not peace. It was a woundless battlefield cooling under the watch of a sentinel, desperate to cleanse what violence had breathed upon the stones. Night after night for 40 days, he glided across the courtyard, purifying spiritual residue that clung to pillars like invisible soot. Pilgrims who managed to return in those early weeks spoke of an indescribable sweetness in the air, a magnified serenity, as though grief itself had been escorted beyond the horizon. They never knew the unseen janitors sweeping angst from their footsteps, and still the Guardian's flame did not dim. It merely bent itself to the age of electricity and concrete. CCTV cameras went up. He learned to flicker between frames. Air-conditioned vents hummed. He rode the currents like a silent muezzin, calling only other jinn to vigilance. Yet the final chapters of his vigil are etched in prophecy. Islamic tradition whispers that near the end of days, a force from Abyssinia will topple the Kaaba stone by stone. Who knows? He has traced every syllable of that hadith like a scar across his own spirit. But hope, paradoxically, is his greatest weapon. For hope is faith on fire, till the destined hour strikes. He will stand in exile from Restander, a sky that sometimes feels too small for the eternity of his watchfulness. So tonight, wherever you are, London Flat, Brooklyn Loft, a lonely midnight highway pause, and face your heart toward that ancient cube. Picture pilgrims circling in rivers of white cloth, and above them layered invisibly like atmosphere itself, a being of fire whose loyalty has never flickered. Ask yourself, if such devotion can blaze within one unseen soul for 1400 years, what ember might already be glowing in you? Tell me, traveler, between screens and silence, what part of this hidden chronicle struck you the deepest? Pour your reflections into the comments below. For every word you share becomes another lantern against the dark hand somewhere. Perhaps a watchful guardian will smile at the light you leave behind.